My name is Trevor, and this happened in late 2020, right before winter. I lived alone in a small one-story house in Missouri. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was close to my job and perfect for someone who had lived by himself his whole life. I was a quiet guy, kept to myself, but I wasn't antisocial. I knew my neighbors well enough. The house to my left was owned by a middle-aged couple named Clay and Rebecca. Nice people. The one to my right was empty for months until someone new moved in. It was a woman in her mid-30s. She introduced herself as Elaine. She seemed normal at first, maybe shy but polite. A few days after she moved in, I noticed she had no furniture being carried in, no boxes, no deliveries. I just assumed she moved in light and stayed quiet. Then I noticed something else. She never opened her blinds. Her house looked pitch black even during daylight. It wasn't creepy at first, just unusual. We lived in a quiet neighborhood, and houses here were old, meaning you could pretty much hear anything. Pipes, heaters, raccoons, you name it. But 2 weeks after Elaine moved in, I started hearing noises above my ceiling. First, it was like light footsteps. I convinced myself it was a squirrel or something. Then one night, around 1 in the morning, I heard something that was definitely not an animal. A dragging sound. Slow, dragged footsteps, as if someone was pulling something heavy across wood. My attic wasn't even that big, mostly insulation and beams, so there shouldn't have been any walking space at all. I sat straight up in bed, just listening. Drap, drap. I turned off my bedroom light and opened the window blinds just a tiny bit. From the angle, I could see the attic vent at Elaine's house. And I swear on my life, there was light flickering in her attic. I sat there frozen for a good minute. Now, the reason that freaked me out was because our attics were connected through previous construction. There used to be a shared crawl space before they split the property. There was still a wooden plank that led from one attic to the other. That dragging sound I heard, it was coming from her side, heading toward mine. I didn't sleep that night. A few days later, I walked outside to get my mail. I saw Elaine. She was standing next to her car, but she wasn't unlocking it or loading anything. She was just standing there, staring at the sky. I didn't want to be rude, so I waved. She didn't wave back. She just stared, like she didn't even process that I was there. I opened my mailbox and walked back, trying to pretend nothing happened. But as I was heading up my steps, I heard her soft voice say, "Do you hear them too?" I froze mid-step and turned around. "What?" I asked. "The footsteps," she said quietly. "They don't like it when I make noise." I didn't even know what to say. I forced a nervous laugh and said, "Probably raccoons." She tilted her head slowly, like she was confused. "No," she said, "they're not animals." Then she just turned and walked back inside. That night, I did not sleep. The following night around midnight, I heard something again. But this time it wasn't dragging. It sounded like whispering. Light, muffled, indistinguishable whispering. Picture someone talking, but covering their mouth. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I got out of bed and grabbed the broom handle, and I hit the ceiling. Before the echo of the hit even faded, everything above me went silent. I sat there waiting, barely breathing. Then I heard something that made my body completely freeze. A knock. A slow, deliberate knock right above me, exactly where I had hit the ceiling. Like whatever was up, there was replying. I backed out of my room and slammed the door shut. That night, I slept in my truck outside. The next morning, I called Clay and asked if he ever heard noises in his attic. He told me no. I asked if his attic connected to Elaine's. He said all attics used to connect back in the 60s. That confirmed the pathway still existed. He asked why I was asking, and I just lied, said I heard mice. I wasn't about to tell him. I thought someone was living up there, whispering and knocking back. That evening, I decided to install a motion detection camera in my attic hatch. Not inside the attic, but pointing upwards so if someone ever opened it, I'd see it. Around 2 a.m., the motion alarm went off. My phone buzzed. I opened the camera feed. The attic hatch door was shaking as if someone was trying to push it open from above. I screamed out loud before I even realized I did. I called 911. It took police about 10 minutes to arrive. They searched the attic. What they found made me instantly nauseous. There was fresh food up there, water bottles, a blanket, a pillow, and scratch marks on the wood, like someone had been clawing at surfaces. Not like animal scratches. human fingernails. The police searched Elaine's attic too. That's where it all finally made sense. They found a huge space up there. Someone had been living inside her attic for God knows how long. There were plastic bags full of tissues, bottles filled with urine, and weird children's drawings taped to the beams. Elaine admitted she knew he was there. Her brother. He was mentally ill, violent, and she was hiding him. He would crawl through the old connecting plank into my attic at night. She said he liked the sound of footsteps and voices. When the police asked her why she didn't tell anyone, she simply said, "I didn't want them to take him away." They arrested her and took her brother into custody. The house went totally dark for days. I moved out literally the next week. I still have the audio recording from one night when the whispering was the loudest. I haven't listened to it since. Even though this happened almost 3 years ago, I still live in an apartment. I don't think I could ever move back into a house again. Not after hearing footsteps above me, knowing someone was listening, crawling inches above my head every night. My name is Rachel, and this happened about 2 years ago when I moved into a new apartment in a quiet suburban complex in New Jersey. I was 23 at the time, freshly out of college, and living alone for the first time. I was excited, nervous, and completely unprepared for what would come next. The apartment itself was small but nice. 2 bedrooms, a little balcony, and it was on the second floor, which I liked because it felt more private. The complex was fairly quiet, mostly families and young professionals like me. My neighbors seemed normal at first. The woman across the hall would wave occasionally, and the guy on the first floor kept to himself but was polite if we bumped into each other. Everything felt ordinary. Then, there was the apartment above me. The first day I moved in, I noticed loud, strange noises coming from above. I figured it was just a neighbor walking around. Old buildings creak. I'd read that before. But the noises continued, sometimes late at night, even when I could hear him moving furniture. Or at least that's what I thought it was. The first really weird thing happened about a week after I moved in. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a loud bang above me. Not a subtle creak or a squeak. This was like someone had thrown something heavy against the ceiling. I froze, listening. Then came the footsteps. Slow at first, then faster. It sounded like someone was pacing, circling above my head. I tried calling my friend, but my phone service was spotty. I told myself it was probably nothing, just someone clumsy or careless. I went to bed and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the thumping again, like it was getting closer to the floorboards directly above my bed. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to my neighbor downstairs. "Do you hear your upstairs neighbor a lot?" I asked. She frowned. "No, not really. But my cousin says he's weird, moves things around at night, sometimes talks to himself. Don't know why he lives alone." I laughed it off and didn't think much of it. A few days later, I came home for work around 6 p.m. and found a small package slipped under my door. There was no return address. Inside was a note that said, "Stop looking up. Watch your step." My heart dropped. At first, I thought it was a joke, maybe a prank, but the handwriting was jagged, rushed, almost aggressive. I stuffed it in my bag, locked the door, and tried to ignore it. That night, the noises started again. This time, louder and more deliberate. It wasn't just pacing, it was dragging, scraping. I could hear what sounded like furniture being moved directly above my bed. I got up to check the ceiling light to see if I could see anything from the crack in the ceiling, but the apartment above was completely dark. The next morning, I called the landlord. I explained the noises and the note. He laughed it off. Probably just a kid up there or someone moving furniture. Don't worry about it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something else entirely. A week later, things escalated. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard a loud crash above me, followed by a deep, guttural laugh. Not just any laugh, it sounded aggressive, mocking. I froze. My hands were shaking. I called 911, but by the time a dispatcher picked up, everything was silent. When I tried looking out my window, no one was outside. That night, I set up a small digital recorder in my bedroom while I slept, hoping to capture the noises. I barely slept. Every creak, every thump made me jump. The next morning, I listened to the recording. My blood ran cold. There was a clear voice right above me, whispering, "I see you. I hear you. Don't leave the lights off." I didn't sleep in that apartment again that night. I stayed at a friend's place, terrified to be alone. When I returned a few days later, I found another note slid under my door. This one said, "Good girl. Keep it quiet." I started noticing small things around my apartment that were off. The balcony door was unlocked, even though I always locked it. My kitchen knife was slightly moved from its usual spot. My laptop charger had been unplugged. I was living alone, but I kept seeing subtle signs that someone had been there when I wasn't home. A month in, I finally saw him. I was sitting on my balcony, trying to get some air, when I looked up and saw him in his window above mine. A man, probably in his early 30s, unshaven, wearing a dark hoodie. He was staring down at me, completely still. I froze. He smiled, a slow, chilling smile that made my stomach drop. Then he disappeared from the window as quickly as he appeared. I started locking myself in at night, double-checking doors and windows, but I knew it wasn't enough. I couldn't hear him moving, but I knew he was there. He knew my routines. I felt it. About a week later, something terrifying happened. I was in my bedroom, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the closet door click open. My apartment has one small closet. I hadn't touched it in hours. I froze, staring at the door. Then I heard slow footsteps inside. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the bed, creeping toward the door. I flung it open, and nothing. The closet was empty. My heart was racing. But then I noticed muddy footprints on the carpet, leading from the closet to my bed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner with the lights on until dawn. The next day, I told the landlord everything. I begged him to help me break the lease. He reluctantly agreed, but before I could leave, things got worse. One night, I woke to the sound of whispering again. This time, it was right by my bed. I couldn't see anything, but the voice was cold and menacing. "You can't leave. You're mine." I screamed and ran out of the apartment, barefoot in my pajamas. I ran to the parking lot, looking back at the balcony above me. There he was, leaning over the railing, watching me. I don't think I've ever run so fast in my life. After that, I moved in with my parents temporarily. I filed a police report, but the landlord said there wasn't much they could do. There were no signs of forced entry, no proof the neighbor had entered my apartment. But I knew he had been inside. I finally found a new apartment in a different complex. I moved everything out at night with friends helping me. That night, I took one last look at the balcony above my old apartment. The man was there, standing in the shadows, just watching. I never saw his face clearly, but the sense of menace was palpable. It's been almost 2 years since I left that apartment, and I still have nightmares. Sometimes, I wake up and think I hear footsteps on my ceiling. My paranoia has followed me, even in my new apartment. I've considered security cameras, but I worry that no matter what I do, I'll never feel completely safe again. I've told friends and family about what happened, and most of them don't believe me. They think I imagined it, or that it was stress and paranoia. But I know what I experienced was real. The noises, the notes, the footprints, the face in the window, they weren't coincidences. He was watching me, tracking me, and I'm convinced that if I hadn't moved, something worse would have happened. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I do know one thing. Living below someone who's obsessed with you is a type of horror that never truly leaves you. And no matter how safe I try to feel now, every time I hear a creak above me, I remember the neighbor upstairs and the way he used to smile. My name is Rachel, and this happened a little over a year ago when I moved into a small suburban townhouse in New Jersey. I had just graduated college and was renting a place on my own for the first time. It was supposed to be exciting, my first apartment, my independence, but I quickly learned that living next to certain neighbors can be a nightmare. The townhouse complex was quiet and mostly full of young couples and families. My neighbors on either side seemed friendly enough. On the left was an older couple who barely spoke to anyone, and on the right was a single man who seemed normal. At least I thought so. The first few days were typical. I unpacked, arranged my furniture, and started decorating. Nothing unusual happened, but the very first night, I noticed something odd. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock. At first, I thought it was the apartment next door, or maybe a tree brushing against the siding. But the knock repeated, slow, deliberate, and coming from my wall. I froze, my heart racing. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. just the usual creaks of an old house. I shook my head and laughed at myself for being paranoid. It was my first night alone. I was probably overreacting. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the knock came in a pattern: 3 short taps, pause, then 2 long taps. It was unmistakable. I couldn't ignore it. I spent the rest of the night sitting up on the couch, lights on, listening. Over the next few weeks, the knocking continued almost every night. Sometimes it would happen while I was cooking, other times when I was watching TV. It was always deliberate, always coming from the wall shared with my neighbor. I didn't want to confront him at first. I didn't even know his name. But I started noticing other things. My trash would be moved around in ways I didn't do. Small items would disappear for a day, then reappear somewhere else in my apartment. I started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence. One evening, I decided to finally knock on his door. I knocked lightly, trying not to sound threatening. There was no answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. The lights in his apartment were off, and I couldn't hear any movement. I walked back to my apartment, uneasy but unsure of what to do. A few nights later, I was asleep when I woke up to a whisper. "Rachel." My eyes shot open. My bedroom was dark, but I could see faint shadows dancing across the walls. I sat up and looked around. Nothing. I tried to convince myself it was a dream. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told a friend about it. She suggested I put up a security camera, which I thought was a good idea. I set up a small camera in my living room, facing the wall that I shared with my neighbor. That night, I didn't hear anything unusual. I fell asleep, relieved. But when I checked the footage the next morning, my blood ran cold. On the video, you could see the wall shaking slightly, as if someone was pressing against it. Then, a shadow appeared, a faint silhouette of a man standing just on the other side. He wasn't moving quickly, just watching, and then the shadow disappeared. I called the police. They came, took a report, and said there was little they could do without evidence of forced entry. I felt helpless. The following week, things escalated. I came home from work to find my door unlocked. Nothing was missing, but it was impossible. I always double-checked the lock. I began sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. I installed extra locks on the door, but it didn't stop the feeling that someone was inside my apartment while I wasn't looking. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the floor above me. My townhouse had 2 stories, and I lived on the first floor. I didn't have anyone above me. I grabbed my phone and flashlight and crept to the stairs. As I turned the corner, I saw a shadow at the top of the stairs. The figure didn't move. My flashlight illuminated the space, but the figure seemed unnatural. It didn't have a face I could see, just darkness where a face should be. I screamed, and the figure vanished. I called the police again, but there was no one there when they arrived. The next day, I asked my landlord about the tenant next door. He told me the man's name was Martin, and he'd been living there for over 10 years. He worked nights and kept to himself. That explained why I never saw him much, but it didn't explain the whispers, the knocks, the shadow. I started noticing Martin more during the day. Sometimes when I went outside, I could see him standing at his window, watching me. He wouldn't wave or smile, just watch. I tried confronting him once more. I knocked on his door, but this time, he answered with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I help you?" he said. I just want to talk." "The knocking, the noises, what's going on?" He laughed softly. "Noises? I don't know what you're talking about." His eyes, though, there was something in them. A darkness. A certainty that made me want to turn and run. I didn't argue. I walked back to my apartment, feeling more unsettled than ever. A few nights later, I was asleep when I woke up again. The whispers returned, louder this time. "Rachel, you shouldn't have come here." My bedroom door creaked open. My heart stopped. I reached for the knife under my pillow, but I froze. There was no one there, or so I thought. Then I heard it, the soft dragging of feet across the floor, coming from the wall that separated me from Martin's apartment. It was slow, deliberate. Someone was moving inside the wall, or on the other side of it. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering to the dispatcher. "Someone is in my apartment. I think it's my neighbor. Please hurry." The dispatcher tried to calm me, telling me to stay on the line. I could hear the dragging getting closer, as if it were moving toward my bedroom. I clutched the knife, ready to defend myself. Suddenly it stopped. Silence. I waited, holding my breath, until I heard a faint whisper. "Don't scream." The police arrived minutes later. They searched my apartment and Martin's. There was no sign of forced entry, and Martin insisted he had been asleep the whole time. I couldn't stay there any longer. I packed my things immediately and moved in with a friend. I filed another report with the police, but they said without concrete evidence, there was nothing they could do. Months later, I learned Martin had moved out quietly. No forwarding address, no notice, nothing. I never saw him again, but I still hear knocks sometimes at night. I still feel like someone is watching from the shadows. The worst part? I know that if he had wanted to, he could have gotten inside. The townhouse walls were thin. The locks weren't enough. And Martin, he knew too much about me. I never lived alone again. I never felt safe in that townhouse. And sometimes when I'm lying in bed, I swear I can hear a faint whisper just outside my window. "Rachel."